Okay, I'm doing some testing today on sandpaper. I do a lot of carving when I make rocking chairs, and often the sandpaper will be at kind of a weird angle. It'll kind of hit edges and stuff. And some sandpaper I've noticed has lasted better than some other ones. Now, my big caveat here is not all of these are necessarily appropriate for woodworking and especially around edges and corners. So I'm kind of putting these to the test the way I use them, but they could also be used in a different fashion or on different materials and perform way better. So this is very subjective. It's just from my point of view, and I just want to give a bit of a review on what I think of some of these. This is a rocking chair seat, and it has a lot of curves on it. So I've carved this out with a cut saw grinder. And now it's got big contours on it, and it has some edges. So when I'm in here sanding, I actually have to get up against this edge, and a lot of times only part of the sandpaper face is touching. So you kind of get a lot of the edge of the sandpaper kind of grinding into the seat to shape it. So what happens is paper will wear out differently. So as an example, this is a piece of 80 grit, and the edge really wears out quite quickly when I'm sanding along this edge because there's so much force on it. So I just wanted to see, is there a sandpaper that works really well? Today I'll be looking at the Cia Speed 80 grit. I'll be looking at 3M Cubitron, Festool Rubin 2, and this is two different types of 80 grit sandpaper from a company called Serious Grit. And this one is a ceramic blend, and this one is aluminum oxide. So I'm just gonna give these a test. Again, this is just kind of my thoughts on how I use sandpaper, and I'll just give some basic reviews on what I think. So the first piece of paper I'm gonna use is the Cubitron 3M 80 grit. Again, I really love this paper on a flat surface. I just absolutely love it. I think it's got a lot of grit to it, and it really cuts into the wood, and I feel like it keeps its cutting edges for a long time. If you can keep it from ripping or wearing down, this is currently one of my favorites, and I'm going to give it a whirl on this walnut seat. Okay, so I just finished doing the 80 grit on this seat. The sandpaper feels like it cuts in really well. I feel like the sandpaper is doing a lot of work. Like, it doesn't feel like I had to really put a lot of effort into sanding because the paper was doing a lot of work. And I love that. The only drawback is, yeah, I'm getting kind of this wear in here on this edge where it seems to kind of chip off a bit. Now, the thing is, I feel like it's doing such a good job that I would almost prefer to sacrifice using a few pieces of paper just because of the way I love the way it sounds. But that is one drawback about the 3M Cubitron. Okay, so now I'm trying the new Serious Grit 80. Let's see how it performs. That is the Serious Grit 80, and that really stood up. There is no chipping along the edge. It felt really sharp. It felt like I was really removing a lot of material. It felt really good. I like this. Okay, so this next 80 grit sandpaper is Festool Rubin 2. Okay, so now I'm trying the Cia Speed 80 grit. Okay, so this is the True Grit 80 grit aluminum oxide. Okay, so after sanding these rocking chair seats, got some results. Now, there are some things I can't control. I mean, I only have I only have 5 rocking chair seats, and they're made out of different woods, but it's all walnut and cherry, so they're probably around the same hardness. I feel like some did cut a little bit better, and I feel like some did stand up a little bit better. The Cubitron from 3M, I love this sandpaper. On flat surfaces, it is amazing. It cuts wood beautifully, and I feel like it really holds its sharpness. Just seems like on the edges and curves, the corners just kind of wear off. Now the Serious Grit, this is aluminum oxide one. It was starting to crack a bit, and I don't know. I didn't find it was cutting the wood quite as well as some of the other ones, but still a decent piece of paper. When it gets into the Serious Grit 80, I really like this paper. It really held up well. It still feels super sharp. It did a really good job. And even now, yeah, it still feels quite sharp. Festool Rubin, I like it. It was really good. The paper seemed to stand up quite well. Tiny little chips in there, but nothing major. I think it did well. And then the Sia Speed held up good. I like it. It felt like it was cutting the wood pretty well. Overall, I would say my favorite paper today on these seats was this Serious Grit 80. It just felt like it was cutting well. There's no damage to the paper, and it just held up. Okay, so I have another test here. Again, these tests are very subjective. I'm using paper in a way that it probably wasn't intended to be used for. I'm just doing these tests for myself, just to kind of see what paper can withstand and maybe what's gonna work best in my shop. So again, this is just for fun. There's a lot of caveats here that are not really giving this a strong normalized test, but I'm just playing around. So what I got here is pieces of maple, and they're just kind of sticking up out of the end of this cutting board that I haven't finished yet. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the sander and see how well and how quickly it'll actually wear down this little nub on the edge and just see how they feel. Okay, this is a Serious Grit 80 ceramic blend. Festool Rubin 2. Sia Speed 80. Serious Grit aluminum oxide. So once again, a very subjective test, but in my mind, the papers that felt the best were the Serious Grit, the Festool, and the Sia. They felt really quite good, and there's no damage on the paper. The Serious Grit aluminum oxide, it felt slower. The 3M Cubitron, when I was cutting it, I was actually, and I know this isn't good, but I had the sander to the back. It was cutting like butter. Like it just feels so strong, but I get the paper wear. So again, if this was on a flat surface, I truly feel like this is one of the best cutting sandpapers. But again, it's just those edges, dig into the paper and remove the grit. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do, again, I can't say it enough. These are just kind of silly little tests that I'm doing in my shop. But the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to have a situation where the paper hits at an odd angle and see how it tears. That last test was just to see if I could hit a piece of wood at a strange angle and have it tear, have the paper tear. And if it does tear, that'll determine how much damage you actually do to your Velcro pad. These are really expensive. So, you know, I think they're, last time I bought one, I don't know, they were $70 or $80. So to replace that is really expensive. So what I will say about these papers is the Cubitron, yeah, when I hit those corners, it did tear. This is just a more malleable paper. But I will say, if I'm doing something flat, trying to get a tabletop nice and flat and smooth and get out all sorts of like imperfections, this is still my go-to paper, because on a flat surface, it is amazingly sharp. It cuts very well. It's very reliable. I love it. So maybe just don't use this on edges and curves. Now, the other papers, the aluminum oxide Serious Grit held up really well. I mean, there are some marks on the paper, but it's not bad. The only thing is I didn't feel like it cut as well. Like I felt like I had to maybe do a little bit more work to actually get the wood being removed, but overall good paper. The Sia Speed, it held up pretty well. So if I was to hit an edge or a corner or something, you know, it did tear a little bit, but not too bad. I mean, again, these tests are extremely hard to make normalized and making sure I'm hitting things the same way, but it didn't do too bad. Festool, I think, does really well. It just chips off. So even if it chips, you know, there's still protection by the paper over your Velcro pad. So I really like that. Surprise, surprise. The Serious Grit 80 took a real beating. I mean, it's almost perfect. It has a little bit of a corner there, but there's still a little bit of paper. I'm really impressed with this paper. So I think the point of this video is I'm not trying to say that there's any sandpaper here that's really, really bad, because I think they all have their own purposes and they have their own strengths. But if I was to say, did I find a paper I'm surprised by and I really like? Yes, this Serious Grit is really nice paper. I really like it. So I don't know, I'm gonna keep giving it a try, and maybe in a little while I'll get some other grits and see how it operates on other parts of rocking chairs. Thanks for watching.